Audio transcript begins with a steady interference typical of in-car patrol units operating in rural districts, followed by Officer Hale identifying himself by call sign 211 as he documents the sequence for later review, stating that the request from dispatch at 3:42 concerned repeated 911 hang-ups traced to an abandoned property off Mile Road 6. Formerly registered to the Wexler family before the foreclosure in 2019, with the structure reportedly unoccupied since a structural fire rendered the interior unstable, though dispatch noted a callback ping indicating an active mobile device detectably moving inside the coordinates of the main dwelling despite no associated service account. And while approaching the access road, Hale remarks that the surrounding fog density is unusual for the season and visibility is reduced to 10, maybe 12 meters, forcing him to keep speed at under 15. The dashcam capturing only intermittent glimpses of frost on branches and the faint reflection of his own headlights bouncing back from the fog, as though the air itself held particulate matter. And upon arrival at the property perimeter, he confirms no vehicles present, no movement, no tracks except what might be faint impressions leading from the tree lean toward the back porch, but indistinct, possibly animal, though aligned in a disturbingly linear pattern. And he notes the temperature drop inside the cabin of the cruiser despite the heater running at standard output. His breath visible on the body cam when he opens the door, immediately followed by a sharp static pop on the recording as though a transmission spiked on a nearby band. Yet dispatch logs show no radio traffic at that moment, and he proceeds toward the structure, giving a standard call-out and announcing entry, receiving only a deep echo that suggests the interior rooms are mostly hollowed out, with the odor of char, wet timber, and something metallic underlying it, possibly rust or old wiring, and the light from his shoulder lamp reveals the remnants of the fire damage, blackened support beams, a collapsed section of ceiling angled downward like an open jaw, insulation hanging in strands, and soot smeared across what used to be the kitchen floor, though Hale pauses when the lamp picks out fresh disturbance in the ash. A set of parallel drags, like someone had pulled something heavy from the center of the room toward the corridor. And he speaks quietly, noting that the edges of the drag marks retain crisp contours, implying they were made recently, within hours, not days, no dust layering over them. And further down the hall, he locates the stairwell where the fire had gutted the second floor, leaving exposed joists like ribs, and from somewhere above there's a faint rhythm. Not quite footsteps, too slow and irregular, more like weight shifting. And Hale radios dispatch for confirmation of any additional units nearby, but receives only an open carrier noise for several seconds, before the channel clears with a weak reply that sounds spliced or partially overwritten, though dispatch later states no such interference was present on their end. And advancing deeper into the structure, he remarks on a repeating tone detectable just at the threshold of hearing, a low oscillation between two notes occurring every 5 seconds, and bodycam audio corroborates this, though later analysis suggests the frequency doesn't match any standard household device, emergency beacon, or natural mechanical resonance of the building. And when Hale reaches the far bedroom, he observes what he initially believes to be a person standing near the collapsed window frame. But when he focuses the beam, the figure resolves into an old coat upon a cracked mannequin torso, something likely left by previous tenants or squatters. Though the mannequin's position facing the door and the coating of ash on the shoulders suggests it had not been moved in years, contradicting his first impression, that he had seen it shifting. And while he circles the room, he hears a soft vibration from the floorboards under his boots, not from structural instability, but from something moving beneath them in a slow scraping pattern, like fingertips trailing along the underside of the wood. And the sound ceases abruptly when he kneels to inspect, leaving only silence, followed by a single chime from somewhere deeper in the house. Unmistakably the alert tone of a mobile device, the same frequency as the emergency call ping, though no device is visible in the room. and Hale records that the chime came from the direction of the basement access, a location officially marked sealed after the fire report due to collapse hazard. But when he reaches the basement door, he finds it slightly ajar. The padlock snapped clean rather than rusted through. And inside, he detects movement of cold air rising from the lower level, rhythmic, as though synchronized with breathing or tide-like inhalations. And he radios dispatch again, stating his intention to descend for visual confirmation of the source of the call, noting the unusual sensation that the air pressure is subtly pulling him inward, like a draft reversed. And he steps onto the first stair, with flexing under his weight, the darkness swallowing most of the lamp's beam. And the audio ends with Hale uttering an unintelligible phrase, possibly startled, before the recording cuts for 3 seconds and resumes with heavier breathing and a low crackling undertone, whose origin remains undetermined. Body cam resumes with Officer Hale descending the basement steps while the interference grows thicker, each footfall followed by a faint echo that does not match the acoustics of the space, as though someone else is stepping a fraction of a second behind him, and he pauses twice to verify that the sound is indeed delayed and not simultaneous, which would indicate structural shifting, but the lag is too intentional, too evenly paced, prompting Hale to radio again, though the channel opens with only a soft modulation like distant air being pulled through a long metal vent. And when he reaches the concrete floor, the first sweep of the lamp reveals a wide chamber larger than the official floor plan indicates, walls extending farther than they should, the depth impossible to reconcile with the known layout, and scattered across the floor are old structural supports, rolls of insulation, melted plastic containers, and a toppled metal shelving unit, all unremarkable except for the absence of dust on certain areas, as though someone had walked or dragged something through in recent hours, leaving distinct paths through the sediment. And as Hale narrates this, he focuses his beam on a series of small objects arranged in a rough semicircle near the far wall, metallic reflections revealing them to be old SIM cards set upright in the ash, as if planted deliberately like markers or identifiers, none of them matching any active carrier numbers, later confirmed by digital forensics. Though some are fused into the concrete as if subjected to extreme heat localized in perfect circular patterns beneath each card, which the investigation team later cannot replicate, and Hale moves toward the center of the basement where the chime sounds again. The same mobile alert tone, clearer now, emanating from behind a partially collapsed utility door. And when he pushes it open, a gust of cold air knocks dust into the camera lens, momentarily obscuring visibility, after which the basement's geometry appears subtly altered. The support beam Hale passed moments earlier now stands at a slightly different angle, and a shelving unit he described as toppled appears upright in the periphery of the frame. Though Hale does not comment on this change, suggesting he did not notice, and inside the small utility alcove, he finds an object that should not logically be present. A smartphone with its screen illuminated, propped precisely at waist height on a protruding pipe, as if placed for him to see. And though the device is scorched around the edges and lacks any identifiable branding or casing, the display is functional, showing a single missed call notification timestamped 342. The exact second dispatch registered the last hang-up, and the number displayed is a repeating sequence of zeros ending with a single 9, which does not correspond to any real-world numbering system. And Hale notes aloud that the phone has no battery indicator, no service icon, no visible UI elements except the notification. And when he reaches to touch it, the screen flickers and the missed call log opens automatically to reveal an audio file labeled Simply Listen, though Hale states he did not tap anything. And before he can react, the file autoplays, emitting a low, layer distortion unlike voice or mechanical noise, more like multiple channels of static compressed into a narrow band. And within it, the faint human-like tone surfaces for half a second, a drawn-out inhalation that mirrors the breathing patterns previously noted in the stairwell. And Hale instinctively pulls back, documenting that the temperature drops sharply and his breath fog thickens, even though his external thermometer reads an impossible 18 degrees Celsius. And then the phone screen abruptly freezes on an image that appears only for 2 frames on the body cam. A silhouette standing behind Hale at the top of the basement stairs, motionless, shape indeterminate but tall, with arms hanging slightly too low. And although Hale does not see it in the moment, the body cam captures a shadow, elongating unnaturally across the floor, as though someone behind him is casting a second shadow overlapping his. And the phone display shatters without being touched, glass cracking outward from a single central point, dropping to the floor in several pieces that continue to vibrate long after landing, as though resonating with some internal frequency. And Hale backs out of the alcove, breathing hard, reporting that the oscillation tone has returned, louder and more deliberate, now matching the timing of his own exhalations, syncing perfectly with the rise and fall of his chest. And the camera shows dust drifting upward from the floor rather than settling downward, reversing gravity for suspended particles in brief pulses synchronized with the same oscillation. And as Hale moves toward the stairs, the interference overtakes the audio again, drowning out his radio attempts. Though one intelligible burst captures a distorted phrase that sounds like "not alone," though the speaker is not Hale according to spectral analysis of the audio signature, and when he reaches the stairwell, the geometry of the basement appears further altered. The stairs now steeper, the handrail missing, and the doorway at the top narrower, as if the structure has constricted, yet Hale ascends regardless, documenting dizziness, pressure in the ears, and a sensation of the air behind him, pulling upward in a steady, swallowing motion. And at the top landing, his lamp reveals that the interior of the house above no longer matches what he saw earlier. The hallway appears longer, the walls smeared with dripping soot patterns forming shapes reminiscent of fingerprints dragged downward, and the mannequin he saw in the far bedroom now stands in the hallway, facing him even though he never heard movement, and the right arm is slightly raised as if signaling or pointing toward the corridor leading deeper into the house. And the recording ends with Hale whispering that something is moving on the second floor despite the fire having destroyed all access. Body cam resumes with Hale advancing slowly toward the distorted hallway, while the mannequin remains positioned in the center, its ash-coated surface reflecting the lamplight in dull pulses as though the soot itself is breathing. And Hale circles around it carefully, documenting that the right arm is now angled slightly downward, the hand turned inward as if indicating not a direction, but a specific point on the floor beneath the warped boards. And before he can inspect, a faint tapping begins. Above him, too deliberate to be settling wood, spaced in a slow sequence of 3, pause, 2, pause, then a long single scrape that resonates through the walls like fingernails dragged across metal rather than burnt timber. And Hale notes his internal mic picks up a secondary vibration layered beneath the tapping, similar to a voice but stretched thin, elongated beyond natural pitch, as though the source were attempting speech through a long hollow tube. And while he advances, the hallway visibly shifts in the camera feed, the walls tightening inward by degrees between frames, narrowing the passage behind him while subtly widening ahead, creating a forced perspective that contradicts the physical architecture of the original structure. And Hale mutters that the pressure in his ears is increasing again, describing it like standing next to a pressurized airlock, with faint pops heard in the recording as he swallows to equalize. But the pressure does not ease, instead building with each step until faint red capillaries burst in the sclera of his left eye, visible when he briefly passes near a broken mirror shard on the floor, which reflects his face in a distorted concave shape, though the camera captures a second reflection overlapping his own, a dark shape standing where no one is present. And Hale does not appear to notice. Continuing deeper into the corridor where the soot on the walls begins forming streaks like writing, long parallel lines descending in uniform spacing, not random. almost like timestamps or log marks, each one vibrating faintly as if scored into the wall moments before he arrived. And from the end of the hallway, the mobile alert tone rings again, louder now, echoing from the collapsed second floor despite that section having no stable surface remaining. And Hale directs his beam upward where, in the blackened cavity of the destroyed floorboards, a small rectangle of pale light flickers. Another phone screen, suspended at an impossible angle above the void, not resting on any visible support, hanging as though held in place by tension in the air. And Hale whispers that the beam does not reach far enough. And when he adjusts the lamp, the phone shifts slightly, like something unseen has nudged it or repositioned it to keep the screen facing him, and the device begins vibrating, the sound amplified by the hollow cavity so that it resonates through the entire structure like the hum of distant machinery. And the soot patterns along the walls begin drifting upward in thin strands drawn toward the vibration as if magnetized, leaving long bare streaks behind. And Hale radios for immediate backup. But the transmission is met with a burst of layered audio, multiple overlapping voices saying his call sign in staggered timing, some slow, some rapid, some inverted, as if the system is replaying his own logs back to him cut into uneven fragments, and he freezes, stating that movement is visible through the opening above. Something shifting behind the vibrating phone, a shape moving in a slow, rolling fold like fabric unfolding underwater, though its dimensions remain unclear, expanding and contracting along the edge of the opening with a soft, damp sound. And then the phone drops, plummeting through the gap, but before it hits the floor, it halts mid-air as though caught by invisible hands, hangs for 2 seconds, and then accelerates upward, vanishing back into the cavity at an unnatural speed, accompanied by a deep inhalation sound that almost resembles a gasp of satisfaction. And Hale records that a cold shock runs across his spine as the tapping above resumes, now directly synchronized with his heartbeat, matching each pulse with a soft, hollow knock. And when he retreats 2 steps, the hallway contracts behind him, door frames warping into narrow arches, closing off the path backward, while ahead the soot marks rearrange into converging lines leading him toward the room on the right, the one partially collapsed earlier. But now the doorway stands intact, framed straight, wood unburnt, as if restored moments before he arrived. And from inside the room, the muffled static of the earlier audio file leaks through, the same layer distortion, but this time clearer, containing within it a rhythmic cadence similar to speech patterns, though no words can be identified. And Hale steps inside, noting immediately that the room does not match any known layout from the original floor plan, now appearing larger, almost square, the walls bare except for a single charred beam in the center. Standing upright like a pillar and nailed to the beam at eye level is another SIM card, this one pristine, no scorch marks, reflecting the lamp with a mirror-clean surface. And when Hale approaches, his breathing begins cycling out of sync with his own chest movements. The audio capturing 2 sets of inhalations, one matching his physical breaths, and another quieter but perfectly aligned with the timing of the oscillation tone that begins to return, and the room darkens at the corners as though the shadows are being drawn inward toward the beam, and the SIM card begins vibrating against the nail, first lightly, then violently, until it dislodges and drops onto the floor, spinning and rattling in a tight circle. And when it stops, lying face up, the body cam captures a brief reflection in its surface. A face behind Hale, close, too close, features indistinct, elongated horizontally as though stretched across the reflective plane, and the recording ends abruptly with the beam snapping loudly, the room seeming to buckle inward as if collapsing around him, followed by a single sharp gasp and a blackout in the feed. Bodycam returns with a burst of corrupted frames showing fragments of the ceiling rushing past as if Hale is being pulled backward, though no corresponding movement of his arms or legs is visible. suggesting his body is rigid or suspended, and the audio is swallowed by a deep pressure hum that flattens nearly all high frequencies, creating a vacuum-like silence under the distortion until the feed stabilizes on a new location within the house, one the official structural map does not list. A long, low room framed by half-collapsed support beams angled like broken ribs, their shadows converging at a central point where Hale lies partially propped against debris, breathing heavily, voice trembling yet controlled as he narrates that the house interior has shifted again and he cannot determine the direction he was pulled from, only that the floor and ceiling inverted for several seconds before settling. Though his equilibrium indicates he was rotated without the sensation of movement, and he attempts to stand but slips on a fine layer of ash that appears to be falling upward, drifting from the floor toward the ceiling in small spirals, as if gravity has rotated 90 degrees only for particulate matter. And Hale states he can hear footsteps above him, even though according to the blueprint the space above should be open sky due to the collapse. And then the footsteps stop directly overhead, followed by a slow, deep scrape moving along the length of the beam, echoing through the chamber like something large is testing the structure's load, and the beam nearest Hale begins to bend with the sound, not snapping, but elongating slightly as though softening under an invisible weight, and Hale backs toward a wall, but finds instead a rough opening leading into another corridor, darker and narrower, filled with a faint pulsing light emanating from somewhere far ahead, and he steps inside, documenting a cold wind blowing toward him with unnatural regularity, like breath, exhaled at long intervals. And the walls of this passage are charred yet strangely smooth, almost polished, streaked with melted resin-like patterns that resemble fingerprints dragged in long arcs, spiraling inward toward the source of the light. And as he approaches, the pulsing resolves into a flicker matching the cadence of the mobile alert tone, though now slowed and stretched to an almost whale song depth. And rounding a tight corner, he enters a circular chamber with a ceiling collapsed into a funnel-like cone pointing downward. The edges of the collapse perfectly symmetrical as if carved, and suspended at the midpoint of the space is the same scorched phone from the basement, held aloft by nothing visible, screen dark except for a faint internal glow like a pulse behind frosted glass, and scattered below in a ring are dozens of SIM cards arranged meticulously in concentric circles, their reflective surfaces angled upward as though waiting. And Hale whispers that none of these were here when he passed this section earlier, meaning the house's interior is rearranging in real time. And as he steps closer, the glow inside the phone brightens, revealing the screen, now displaying a call timer already counting upward despite no call being placed, the numbers climbing in half-second increments. 16 seconds, 17 seconds, 18 seconds, until a voice emerges through the body cam mic. Low and dry, not transmitted electronically, but vibrating the air itself, saying Hale's name in a stretched, almost reverse pronunciation, and Hale freezes, stating the voice is not coming from the device, but from behind the screen, as if something deeper within the structure of the phone is speaking, and the SIM cards begin to rattle in their rings, each one vibrating at slightly different frequencies that form a discordant harmony, beginning as light ticks and escalating into sharp metallic snaps as one by one they flip over, revealing their gold contacts like dozens of small eyes turning to face him. And Hale attempts to back away, but the corridor behind him is sealed, the walls contracting into a solid mass of soot-covered boards, and he radios for assistance, though only his own voice comes back through the speaker, repeated in a slower, lower version of itself, then repeated again faster, creating a multi-layered echo of his plea for help, looping tighter until it becomes one continuous tone, and the phone's hanging position shifts, tilting slowly downward as if examining him. The call timer now at 1 minute and 9 seconds, the glow intensifying until the screen appears to bulge outward from internal pressure, and the chamber begins to pulse, the walls expanding and contracting in unison with the glow, emitting a deep inhalation sound each time they draw inward, and Hale steadies himself, describing pressure in his skull, vision narrowing, the edges of the room softening as though the structure is beginning to blur or liquefy, and the SIM cards abruptly lift off the floor, rising in chaotic spirals around the phone, colliding in bursts of sparks that leave scorch marks in midair that linger like afterimages, defying physical logic. And when the phone emits a sharp tone identical to the emergency alert, but amplified to a piercing metallic shriek, the SIM cards disperse like shrapnel, slamming into the walls and embedding themselves deeply, forming patterns that resemble warped constellations, leaving Hale alone as the phone drops straight down into the ash at his feet without making a sound, and the call timer freezes at 1 minute and 44 seconds. The screen flickers, and an image appears for a fraction of a second. The missing officers associated with previous 911 hang-up calls at this property, standing in the basement chamber, motionless, faces blurred as if vibrating rapidly, eyes open, looking toward the camera, and Hale breathes out sharply as the screen shatters again. Without physical impact, the glow extinguished, and the chamber lights only with his lamp, revealing no exit, no structural seams, only soot-covered surfaces contracting subtly with each inhale-like pulse. And the recording ends with Hale stating in a near whisper that someone else is breathing inside his mask, the second rhythm layered beneath his own, followed by a sudden hard jolt of the camera, as though something grabbed him by the back of the vest and pulled him upward into darkness. And then the feed cuts to total black, the audio capturing a final prolonged exhale not belonging to Hale.